Cohen. Christians first.
Okay, we had sent in advance a few slides to help provide some visual support to the presentation. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to step up and make comments. My name is Christian Vesha. This is Brent Cohen. We've been with basically leading a community-based organization of residents that have concerns about current standards, has been involved with this for quite a while. Try and keep this as brief as possible. We are two people, so in the past we've been given a little more leeway than single comments. I guess I'd like to begin by saying that we think there are many good ideas presented in the forms-based approach, and are also very happy to see some of the process-related changes, because over time we've come to the very firm view that good outcomes and a reasonable balance of rights between residents, whether they're new or have been in the house next door for 15 years, it requires both good standards that are clear and objective and good process. So that we're happy to see. At the same time, I'd say we're pretty disappointed that we don't feel like the city has made any substantive changes since the last meeting, or since these recommendations were proposed, specifically to address some of the concerns raised by residents. I've seen some potential accommodations to comments made from architects, but not directly from residents. So can we have the next slide, please? Oh, I've got the clicker. So really to refocus, you know, how this all began and what we're here to solve, it really is the impact of oversized homes on two things: neighbors who are next door in homes, on their privacy, light and air, the general quality of life in a home that they've been in for a long time, as well as what's the experience as you walk down the street. And I would characterize the first as being the neighbor experience and the other as being the street experience. I think both are important. I think we've gotten a solution to maybe half of the issue here, which is the street experience. Because I think that's first and foremost what forms-based design focuses on. I also want to go back to the fact that at the beginning of this process, the city's own survey asking the question, how should San Carlos zoning standards compare to other cities on the peninsula? More than 3/4 said, we'd like to see standards for house size in San Carlos that are equivalent to, or what was it, 37% said actually more restrictive than standards in neighboring cities. And if you look at what has been proposed, we're getting exactly the opposite of that. It's standards that are 35 to 45% bigger than the median of zoning of FAR limits in and house size limits in neighboring communities. So I have a few things to say about SHAC. I was on SHAC. I'm one of the members. Let's start with the fact that there were concerned, committed residents involved. We began by identifying what we thought the issues were. I think our group provided valuable feedbacks and ideas, but I will tell you that the focus and the ideas that we addressed were basically form-based recommendations from the start. And as a group, we were asked to provide feedback on form-based recommendations, not to consider a waterfront of potential solutions, but say, do you like moving the garage? Do you like, the idea of wings? And you could go through each of those things and like them. The other thing I want to say is I think that it's an advisory body. We didn't write the recommendations. We didn't make the recommendations. And the support for ultimately them, nor was it a unanimous. So I take a little concern at the notion that the SHAC recommended this and SHAC did that. These are the city's recommendations with input from SHAC. And I would also say that it was supposed to be 3 people on the committee who had some connection with building, architecture, or real estate. In the end, we had 5. So I don't think SHAC represents broad-based community values. It was useful input, but it's not. So these are the number of meetings that have been held on this issue. Good Growth has attended pretty much all of these, and as an individual, since I was on SHAC, I've attended every single one. I have heard in excess of 100 residents stand up and make comments about their views and what they hope this would do for the city. And I would say 95% of those have been in favor of reasonable standards in line with other communities on the peninsula. I have heard almost no one stand up and say, oh, you know what, we need to preserve the right to have very large homes or oversized homes in San Carlos. That's important to me. I think the focus on size, scale, and mass omits the question of why do we care about those things. Those are abstract principles. We care about them because of the impact they have on us next door, because of the way they change the look and the feel of our city as a whole. So what we're trying to solve for is residents' experience and the street experience, and I don't think we should be satisfied until we've done both.
Yeah, so, to sum this up, and keep this brief, right? We mentioned this the last meeting. I think we mentioned this pretty consistently, as well as many other residents. We believe that there's been a lot of good work done in terms of form-based approach, but at the same point in time, I think we would take exception with not having some type of maximum bar out there. All of the other mid-peninsula cities do. It appears the form-based approach still has much larger homes than our peer cities when we look at it. It doesn't appear that that's what the residents want when you look at the one survey that was done with the 78% who want at least as restrictive, if not more restrictive, development standards. So we believe that a FAR needs to be complementary here and inserted as part of this. In general, the comments tend to reside along the lines of the streetscape view as opposed to the side-by-side resident view. And so, analogy I heard somebody use a while back was like, putting pinstripes on an elephant, on the front, that might help. On the side profile might still not help so much. So we believe that's important. We also believe having some sort of protection as it relates to light is important as well. So therefore, a daylight plain standard seems to be acceptable in many other mid-peninsula cities. It seems to work for them. Based on what Stefan said, exemptions can be granted in certain cases with one of those standards in place. So we believe that's important as well. And then finally, we are encouraged, I would say, Christian, I think you'd agree, that we have seen a lot of thought being given to the overall residential design review process and making some changes there. And we applaud those efforts in terms of broader notifications, as well as having the architects sit on the RDRC, and the idea of having waivers and some relief potentially, so the RDRC actually has more power within their authority, as opposed to, I think the general perception is they've been just rubber stamping everything that's come through because they've had no choice over the last several years. So closing, we would just point out once again that the overall FAR that we see in terms of looking at the mid-peninsula cities, in terms of the ones we looked at, the median ranges between 51 to 54%, and it actually gets smaller as you go towards larger lot size. So the idea that we have these resulting FARs of in the 70s, down from the 90s, while that's better, we just simply don't believe it's good enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to make two closing points. One is that to reiterate or to say what Brent said, we had literally standards that allowed houses twice as large as just any other city. So the fact that we have reduced from something that was so out of line, the fact that it's a reduction doesn't mean it solves the problem. And the challenge I would put to the Planning Commission and at San Carlos to say, how do we know that these recommendations solve the problem? I don't think they've been pressure tested. You're asking us to do a uncontrolled trial on the entire city for standards and just say, well, because size and mass, form-based should make a difference, that they solve the problem. And I haven't yet to see any data or pressure testing from the city that would indicate this actually does address the issue. So thank you for your time, and we'll let the other residents have a moment.
Thank you both for your comments.
One real quick thing. When you're talking about on your proposed max house size graph, when you're taking the average and the median numbers, is that including the current San Carlos standard or just the other city standard?
Yeah, if you go back to that graph. So the graph, the average and the median are for the 6 other cities on the peninsula.
Okay, so it doesn't include San Carlos at all?
No, it does.
It does, as at the 91?
The calculations do not, in the average and the median. They do not include San Carlos.
All right, so the average, these two numbers, the average and the median, are just the green bars?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
And can you also say, is the San Carlos column proposed, not current, right?
The deep red is the current, and so, you know, allows on a 5,000 square foot lot a 4,500 square foot house versus the median of 2,600. And the pink bar is the reduction. So that's where just because something has become smaller doesn't mean it solves the issue. Oh, sorry, we're looking at,
Yeah, on this particular
On that one?
chart, is the San Carlos proposed or existing?
that is proposed.
Thank you.
Next is Linda Ferreira.
Yeah, I'm fine. Tripped over your feet, sorry about that. What a way to make a personal impact. I've been waiting so long, my feet aren't working. I'm Linda Ferreira, hi. I've lived in San Carlos in my current house for 20 years. And I've made this speech probably before, but for those of you that are new, for the last 5 years, I've lived in absolute fear because the house next door to me was inhabited by a very old lady who finally passed away, and the house sat empty for all those years while she lived at San Carlos Elms. And when she passed away, of course, the house went up for sale. And it was a nice little one-story house, and I lived in absolute fear that whoever bought it was going to build one of the McMansions, and it was going to interfere with my privacy, light, and air, as everyone who was at previous meetings complained about, on, and that my privacy in my backyard was going to be destroyed. And I just envisioned, you know, an entire family peering out of their windows into my backyard. And not that I have anything to hide, but you can all just imagine the same thing happening to you, and you wouldn't like it either. So fortunately, the young couple, very young couple that bought the house couldn't afford to do that and kept the exact footprint and didn't go up. And so I dodged a bullet, and I'm very, very happy about that. So I get to keep my backyard and my privacy, even though all the houses around me are very, you know, we have shallow backyards, and we can hear each other, and we can hear the neighbors fighting and all the other stuff, even though I have probably 15, 20 feet between each of the 4 or 5 houses that are very close to me. I live on Charlton, which is in between Beverly and Devonshire, and it's a wonderful neighborhood. However, the thing that bothers me the most about, other than everything that was just mentioned by our leader over here on Good Growth San Carlos, but one of the things that bothers me the most that hasn't really been talked about too much is the setbacks. And to me, the 5-foot setback on the sides of the houses is, I know it's the current standard, and I just think that that is just not sufficient. Because especially with this sliding around of the house thing that we're supposed to be negotiating with our neighbors. I mean, get a grip. I mean, who's going to do that? And first of all, you push the house 5 feet over on one foot, so you have 2 feet. How are you going to paint the side of your house? 1 foot, no feet? I mean, what's going to happen? You see, you got this other house that's like, it's right on their property line. Those people aren't going to go for that. And so then you got, what, 10 feet on the other side? Great. I want to be on that side. But still, that's like 10 feet. What, you plant a couple bushes, now you got 5 feet. And so that's just not going to work. I have 20 feet, and you can still hear the people out there talking with their coffee in the morning while you're out there talking with their coffee in the morning. I mean, you could throw the dog ball and hit them. I mean, 5 feet, come on, guys, that's not enough. Maybe you guys that live up on Crestview where you never go outside because your lots are on a hill, but when we're down on the flats, we go outside all the time. We're sitting out there, the kids are playing, you know, that people next door, their kids are playing, their dogs are barking. You got to have more than 5 feet. And as far as the house sliding around, and you're going to negotiate with your neighbors, That's not going to happen. You're going to hate each other before they even move in. You wouldn't move your house over, you slide it over on the other side? Come on. And who's going to arbitrate where the windows are going to go? I mean, you're going to do that?
Well, the RDRC does that. I mean, that's what the RDRC, a lot of what the RDRC does is negotiate those windows.
Yeah, I can see that now. So then my new neighbors come and they want to put their window right where my bedroom window is on the upstairs. And so you guys are going to say, no, you got to move it over. And they're going to go, okay, like you said, you're going to pay another, $20,000 to have your architect, redesign the plans and then get in line down at the planning office and wait another 3 months for them to approve I don't know how long it takes, or 2 months or whatever to approve the change designs. I mean, it seems to me that this stuff needs to be like laid out. There's got to be a better way to do it. And I agree with what was said about, this was the only plan that was put forward. And every time we've tried to come up with, no, the public, I mean, what that other meeting you had in the other room that was overflow crowd with 150 people or whatever, everybody said the same thing. Unfortunately, those people only wanted to go to one meeting. So they just showed up to that one meeting. I never wanted to go to this many meetings. I've been to like 4 of these meetings. I never wanted to be this involved in politics. I don't like coming here. I mean, you guys are all really nice people, but I don't want to spend my evenings here. I got other things to do. I don't even have a house being built or anybody by me. I'm doing this because I am dedicated to follow this through to try to save somebody else from having to worry for 5 years about what's getting built next to them. Because I started it and I want to finish it. And I just don't think we're going anywhere with this stuff. I mean, you were going to have a group of people, of citizens, and one architect and one real estate person, and the next thing we know, it's turned over to, no offense, a consultant. Well, I used to be in purchasing. I know what happens. You hire a consultant and they give you what you ask for. So whoever gave the scope of work to the consultant is what the consultant does. And when we asked Al like one time before, and Al goes, well, that's what the city council asked us to do. And it was very specific about what you were asked to do. It didn't include a bigger scope. So other things weren't thought of to be asked for. Well, it's time to ask for more. We should have made a bigger scope in the beginning to talk about how do we make this more equitable to what all the other cities were, instead of being, now we're still like having the biggest house sizes of all the cities on the peninsula. We don't want that. That's us, we people of San Carlos, we don't want that. I mean, the only people that want that are the people that want the big McMansions. The people that live here don't want that. So if they want the big McMansion, buy a bigger lot and stick a big house on it. Don't squeeze it up to 5 feet on either side and all the way back, even including a garage right up to the back property line that you guys said last time people could put an in-law unit on, and that wouldn't even count as in the square feet. No, that's not right. That is not right. That's all I have to say. I think it's not all I have to say. The work is not done. This is not ready to go to the city council. More things need to be looked at. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Margaret Warren.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Warren, and I live up on Hewitt Drive, and I live on a lot that is very steep. My initial reason for coming tonight was to catch up on this because I had not been aware of the group, and I'm sorry I wasn't aware a little sooner. But specifically, I had a couple of major concerns. One of them is in a recent design review decision where a plan was approved for a neighbor of mine to build a close to a McMansion, not quite. The lot size was talked about a lot, and the lot size is about 11,000 square feet. What was not taken into consideration was the true topography of that lot. So what is an 11,000 square foot lot really is not the same when you lay it out flat in the White Oaks area as it is when it is 6,000 square feet and then down, so that you are now in line of sight very close to the neighbor below you. And that's what they did. They built this big thing, and now they're imposing on the privacy of the people who are on Sunset? No, Heather Court, and also on Nanette. So the point is that topography needs to be part of the equation. I'm not sure how one does it, but it has to be, because the mere lot size is not relevant when, for example, I cannot build on the 30 feet behind me that's rock that's heading up towards Heather. It's my property, but I can't build on it. That's technically part of my lot size, but to use that as part of an equation would be absurd. As I listened this evening, several things struck me. Parking. To suggest in this day and age that a one-car garage is appropriate for any house that's being built is an absurdity to me. In the first place, we have whatever the current generation is called coming home with their cars. And don't tell me we're transit-oriented. I don't care how much transit you put, and I don't care how good, even if high-speed rail goes through, the reality is that the peninsula is dedicated to its cars. And we don't even let our children walk to school. God forbid they should walk a block. No, they get driven. So cars are not going away, not in the near future. So to suggest that a one-car garage is adequate under any circumstances is craziness. It's bad planning. Now, when it comes to planning, I speak with a little bit of experience in this. I spent 10 years as a planning commissioner in South San Francisco. Now, granted, it was a few years ago. It was from 87 to 97. But it was a long time, and I went through a whole lot of stuff relative to Mount San Bruno, et cetera. So I'm not inexperienced in this area. Again, one-car garage is not adequate. Compatibility with the neighborhood. One of the things that is not addressed that I saw was actually looking at whatever is proposed, is it compatible with the neighborhood? And as you saw, the big, tall, two-story house with the little one-story houses that don't have a basement next to it on either side, you know, that's not really compatible. The boxiness, I don't know if this was just because it was being done because of the drawings, it was just easier, but to suggest that the boxes that were shown as potential homes looked better than that craftsman style redone rather large home, that these boxes look better than the craftsman. They don't look better. They look like boxes stuck on top of boxes. We have homeless communities that use cardboard boxes. Do we want to make our city look like it's boxes on top of boxes? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This is supposed to be the city of good living. Let's bring it back there. My involvement with the city goes back to the 70s. And my involvement goes back with people I know who were president of the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. I moved to this city in 2005 because I wanted to be in the city of good living. I am now seriously looking that maybe I have made a mistake and maybe I should be looking elsewhere. There were a number of other things, but since I am limited, I will let that go. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Bill Harcola.
I live over by the Burton Park area and did a remodel in my house to capture solar gain. and now I have a large house right next to me that's shadowing me completely for the whole winter. And I'm a proponent of daylight playing, and I think that if that was used as a tool, in addition to the other aspects that were talked about tonight, would, in my case, had it been similar to Palo Alto, which is fairly restrictive, it being 10 feet with a 45-degree angle, I would have 2 more months of light instead of none in the whole winter. And, you know, that's pretty substantial when it's considered that I really enjoyed some wonderful solar gain in the winter, and now it's gone. And I did go through the RDRC process, and, you know, I was shown empathy, but they had no tools, nothing to do that could help me under this circumstance, because they were the neighbor was completely in the rights, and planning approved the project, and they talked about, you know, well, we could plant another tree, you know, but it didn't address me losing all my light in the wintertime, and it's a real shame. So I think there needs to be consideration for light and privacy and the right to that, and that's really important. And when you look at this model here, and you really get down to the scale, these houses are 2 stories just packed next to each other. Is that really what San Carlos is going to look like? You know, I think it gets down to the RDRC can be extremely effective if they have the right tools. I think that the standard should be more restrictive, and then give consideration, and with thoughtful consideration by having architects on, which is great to hear that actually that's going to happen. I'm also a proponent of having a smaller, lower floor area ratio, and I also didn't hear anything about corner lots, and that's predominantly my problem. I'm on a corner lot. So the side yard setback of this 2-story house is facing my rear yard. So something else to consider. So to summarize, I think RDRC is extremely important, and I think that we should have a little bit more restrictive standards than what I've heard today. And I think they've gone, the changes are great. I like the direction it's going in. But we really have to consider reducing the massing incentive on the 2nd story and that effect on neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next is Mr. Kevin Frederick. Kevin, speak to me. Okay. Put him at the bottom of the stack. Next is Michael James.
Hello. So I'm in the hillside area on Beverly, and I have a comment and a question for the council, if that's okay. I'm in a relatively small structure, about 1,900 square feet, and it is very slopey. The terrain is way more restrictive than the building codes could possibly be. But one concern I have is that with the proposed new standards, plus the terrain, it basically makes it impossible to meet every aspect of what's going on. And so the existing structure, even though it's not one of these large properties, would definitely be out of spec of everything discussed. And I believe that's true even with some of the contingencies that were made for the hillside area. And so my question for the council is, if considering renovations for this property, to what extent are changes or improvements possible, given that it's slightly out of spec?
Well, I'll try that through the chair. You would have to really sit down with a city planner at the zoning counter to start, or an architect or designer to kind of see what's there and how the standards would affect your development. Kind of asking the question without kind of seeing your lot and the slope and how your existing house sits on is very difficult to provide an answer. Lisa, did you have anything to add to that?
And the only other thing that I would add to that is that we have received, I think your question may be more of what Al just answered, but in my mind I was thinking about it differently, so maybe I'll just provide additional information. But one of the questions that we've received from the community and the Planning Commission is, how does this apply to existing homes when they want to do an addition or expand off the rear, or however they may choose to expand? And the approach would be no different than what we have today. So today, even under today's standards, when an applicant wants to come in and do an addition, if they have an existing home that may be not compliant with our current standards, they can do an addition provided that the new construction is done in a way that meets the current standards. So we wouldn't make anyone take off or reduce or increase a non-conforming side yard setback. The same would be the case for any new standard that would come out of this process. So you would still be allowed to expand, but the expansion would need to be done in a way that complies to the current regulations. And in these particular cases, like Al said, we really encourage you to come check in with us early on, and we can go over how the potential rules would affect your house.
Okay, I'll do that and check in, but one comment is it's not entirely clear-cut whether just the additions are compliant given all of the form-based rules. So if you were to extend and the existing main body is out of spec, does your extension count as a wing or a main body, et cetera? I can imagine that becoming a sticky process.
Well, like we said, we would work with you on that to determine what the how the form of the existing house would fit in with the current standards, and then where you would be able to expand.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next is Scott Daniels.
I'm a 8-year San Carlos resident and a 30-year Bay Area resident, also a very experienced real estate developer and contractor. That being said, I am in support of more responsible development here. I think our rules are a little bit too generous. And I have developed in 8 different states and many communities within the Bay Area. However, I want to strongly encourage the Planning Commission to move away from a form-based restriction. I've had a lot of experience, as I think the architects in the room do too, of trying to create usable space. And when you create narrow rectangles, especially the wings off them, what you end up creating are a lot of hallways and staircases in very inefficient space. And I think it's unfairly restrictive to the owner of the property. For example, I live on Elm near Britain. I have a 120-foot tall redwood tree in the back of my house. It's a beautiful tree that we've taken good care of, and I'd like to stay a reasonable distance away from it. My little 900-square-foot house is not really adequate for my family, and at some point we plan to expand that. I don't want to encroach on the tree, but a forms-based structure would create so much restriction on the ground floor and on the second floor that I'd be forced to encroach more on that tree. And part of the goal that was set up front was to avoid encroachment to the rear yard or use of the rear yard. I've got neighbors on either side that are 3 feet away from the property line and use about 80% of the lot. So I support an FAR restriction. I listened to the comments tonight. I disagree. I think the neighboring communities are able to create some restriction to the size of homes by using FAR as a guideline. And it would allow us to have flexibility within design and modest or more reasonable size homes on our lots. I'm not in favor of McMansions and overdeveloping the space, but I am in favor of some flexibility. I want to support that other comment about the two-car garage as well. The forms-based discussion is really sort of judgment-based about what people like. I agree with the comment about the boxiness of structures. I've got no problem with the sort of wedding cake design. It is driven in part by the side setbacks and the way we have to stack homes. So when you look at the size of lots that many of us have, my lot is 6,000 square feet, it's 50 feet wide and 120 feet deep. I'm gonna lose the last probably 50 feet of the lot and the first 15 feet of the lot. If I'm forced to take my garage and then shove it back another 15 feet, I have an almost unusable ground floor. So this main body structure or a forms-based structure is just simply too restrictive. I think that we should be allowed to put a two-car garage in if that's what we want to do. I think there's other ways to aesthetically set back or move that garage and make it less prominent in the front of the house if that's an issue. But, you know, we have to reach the reality that as times change and families are looking for more of a family-size home, we can thoughtfully restrict the amount that they build, but still give them the flexibility to have the house that they want. When I look at the proposed main body structure on a second story with the side setbacks that I would have, and I add to it hallways and circulation for stairs, both upstairs and downstairs, what's left are tiny little bedrooms and very little storage. It just becomes an unusable space, and that wouldn't be the case if we used FAR. I want to remind the Planning Commission, too, that we got to this place of oversized homes by a broad sweeping decision that was made years ago. I don't want to see us replicate that same process by swinging the pendulum in the other direction. So I'd much prefer to see us either test some of the solutions or take it in a stepwise fashion. Start with something like FAR. My last comment, I've developed a lot in San Francisco, residential homes in San Francisco. San Francisco absolutely abuses their discretionary review process. There's got to be a better way to do this. There are people that make a living in San Francisco, larger community, larger environment, different economy, but there are people that make a living by disrupting homeowners from building the home that they want, even if it falls within planning code. There are people from different areas that will come in and disrupt that process without any accountability and delay that process until the Board of Permit Appeals can reverse that decision. I don't want to see us get to that. I'd like to see the RDRC have input and work with neighbors and petitioners, but not in a way that violates state code.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned FAR. Is your best case, or what you're proposing, using FAR only or FAR in conjunction with percent lot coverage? Or one or both?
I would use both lot coverage and FAR.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next is David Crabb.
And I apologize, I'll have to depart at this time. Thank you.
Chairman Bergman and members of the commission. I'm Dave Crabb. I'm an architect, live in San Carlos. And I came here pretty much thinking that this whole process is extremely complicated, probably more complicated than it should be. And I started jumping back at the FAR as an approach. And I think the FAR does make a certain amount of approach plus land coverage. Those two together can help reduce massing of buildings considerably. But assuming that this goes ahead, and it has some definitely interesting concept to it, I also don't mind the wedding cake houses, although I don't like to see every one of them. I've designed one that was in San Carlos that met the original code with the wedding cake look. It came out quite nice. Anyway, my big concern about this is this seems to be heading us toward, this form-based code seems to be heading us toward roof lines that are extremely complicated with lots of intersections and whatever have you. And I said this at the last meeting in May. In 2020, the state of California is going to require zero-based or zero-emission houses. That means solar panels on the roof. And we're designing houses that we can't put solar panels on the roof because they're too complicated. So I think that needs to certainly be taken into consideration. Along with that, I think the daylight plane makes a lot of sense, especially again in relationship to the solar requirement. It's not that far off from the diagrams that the consultant showed. It's not that far off to do a inclined plane, like it come up maybe 12 feet or 16 feet in a 45-degree angle. It looks like it met most of the design that he already had in his plan, and so I don't see a big issue with that. So that's a concern there. The one-car garage versus two-car. I don't like cars very well, although I drive one. I have to. I think that tandem parking makes some sense in terms of reducing the size of the garage. I don't like the idea of one car in a garage and one car in the driveway, because I don't like to look at cars. But a tandem garage would be fine. That would work. And then it comes along with if we use this wing scheme, I think the architects commented earlier in some of their correspondence were concerned about the width of the wing. If we're going to do a house and then you put a one-car garage off to the side, the logical place to put that would be under one of those wings that come off the side. That means the wing should be 12 feet wide and at least 21 feet deep, and the code, or the proposal is 18 feet maximum for those wings, so that doesn't make any sense. Where we're going to put those garages. And so that's an issue I have for me. Another issue, they were distinguishing between one-story and two-story houses. If basically in the majority of the city people can build two-story houses, why do we distinguish between requirements for one-story houses and two-story houses? Why aren't they the same? Some of the people that complain because a two-story house comes up next to their one-story house may find themselves in the future needing to expand their house and wanting to go up a second story. And if there are suddenly requirements that say just one-story houses in the entire neighborhood. Now, in certain cases like Eichler's, yes, that makes a lot of sense. They're very unique architectural things, but in other areas, not necessarily. So I'm a little concerned about that. Let's see, anything else here? No, I think that's the primary one. My big thing is the solar access and the inclined plane, and the fact that these roofs are going to be so damn complicated you can't put solar on them. And so I think we need to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Laureen Lederner. Is there a Laureen Lederer? Okay. Lucia Simmertz? Lucia?
Yeah.
Sanchez, sorry.
I can't keep everybody's roles or whatever straight, so just thank you to all of you for the work you're doing and for hearing. I've attended a number of these meetings, and I left the last meeting feeling very hopeful and inspired by the very large number of residents who were there and who were expressing, I thought, in very well articulated way, very concrete terms, their concerns that I believed would be taken seriously by the staff and the consultant. And I found myself today very disappointed. Very disappointed. I find very little has changed between what was proposed before, at the last meeting, and what was proposed today. And I feel like we've been given a chance to speak, but not really a chance to be listened to or heard. And that's a pretty frustrating feeling. And I feel like there's been language used like appearance rather than let's get real. Things are big. So I'm not happy. I would credit this forms-based thing as really trying to address a feel, a look. And I think that addresses how you feel walking by. But I've heard too many stories from too many residents about the impact that they've had in their homes, their privacy, their light, just how they feel in their homes. And I feel like that part has not been addressed very well at all. Then there's also the term flexibility, and I feel like the term flexibility actually is really biased towards people building new things rather than people who are living already in a place. And I'll mention, I've been through a remodel, and we built very modestly, and there was some problem that we had where it actually got built bigger than we wanted to, and we took a hit, we all did, the people, the architect, the builder, and whatever, because we cared so much about keeping within the feel of our neighborhoods and not building up. So we put our money where our mouth is in that regard. Okay. And someone brought this up, and it's something that I felt from the beginning, is this hasn't felt, on the one hand, it's an open process that we're here talking, but on the other hand, the beginning idea that SHAC was given to work on was one idea that they dedicated a ton of time to, and to me, that's not the way a process should start. It should be more open and more brainstorming. So I feel like, in a way, today is an effort to save what John was calling a sophisticated process and whatever. Is that the reason we should save it, because it was sophisticated and a lot of money went into it? Or maybe we made a mistake in the beginning by not being more open and I don't know the right term, but keeping it a more open process from the beginning. So, okay, so, and I was going to mention the solar thing, but the gentleman brought that up. So it's just basically, to be honest, I don't think that the concerns that I've heard from residents have been reflected in the minimal changes that I've seen in what's been proposed today versus what was proposed in the last meeting. And I guess I would also really encourage you guys who are new to go back and look at some of those meetings and see what people had to say, because today we spent from 7 till 9 hearing staff's proposal and the consultants, and I hope certainly John will make the effort to listen to this meeting, the full meetings, and there's a lot of important comments that people have made that are worthy of consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Una Kinsella.
Good evening. My name's Una Kinsella. I actually live in Burlingame, but I'm an architect, and I do quite a bit of work in San Carlos. As a matter of fact, probably 50% of my work is done in San Carlos. And I love San Carlos. And I've been working here for over probably 12 to 14 years. And I would agree with most of the comments that were said tonight by the community. And I appreciate that I was invited to several of the meetings that were had with the local architects. But one thing I would say is that I wish that I had been invited like a year ago. I was asked about being on the SHAC, or at least it was suggested to me. I wasn't available to commit to it. But by the time we got involved in the meeting, which was really productive, and it was great dialogue, and there was a lot of transparency, I felt like these models were already made, the code was already sort of ready to be implemented. And so the feedback that we had, it was hard to say, you know what, you guys, I'm not so sure that this form-based model is something that's going to work here. And it was hard to say that, and that's how I felt. I still feel that. I feel that it is super complex. I read through these code changes and I think, oh my gosh, how am I going to start changing my mindset to design on a property in San Carlos? How am I going to tell a potential client, what I'm going to be able to design when I'm just going to present a proposal to them? I have no idea how it's going to work. It's going to be really challenging. It's going to be really, really challenging. And as somebody who has worked from, it's been years since I've worked in Palo Alto, but from Palo Alto to San Francisco, and I just finished a big project up in Santa Rosa, why isn't the idea of just doing a maximum FAR and a sensible daylight plane, maybe require people to do solar studies. I mean, I've done that on projects in San Carlos where neighbors have been concerned about their light. And I say, you know what? I have a 3D model. I can show you real world sort of solar analysis of what your home's how your home will be affected by my project. It's actually not that hard to do. And I think most designers and architects have the capability to do that. So some of these questions and concerns can really be addressed with an effective design review. So one of the other things I want to point out, besides my concern about the mass and bulk and the commentary from the community of what their major concerns are, which is massing and bulk and privacy, is, I don't know that this form-based model design is going to address the massing issue. And secondly, with allowing a 45-foot long 2-story structure at 5 feet from the property line, that's actually more imposing than what's currently allowed. So if you have a 70-foot long, which is the maximum 1-story house you can put on a 100-foot long property, 30% of that can be a 2-story element that's at 5 foot. That's only 21 feet wide. If you're allowing 45 feet, that's more than double what is currently allowed on either side. If you combine a 45-foot long 2-story wall and then 2 18-foot wings on the opposite side, your total linear footage that can be within 5 foot of the property line, if you combine both sides, is 63 feet. As opposed to 21 and 21, which is 42. So it's a pretty dramatic, it's gonna have a pretty dramatic impact on the neighbors on both sides. Because as an architect who's asked a lot by community, people who are building in this community, what can I get? How can I put all my bedrooms on the second floor? How can I get a great room on the first floor? You know, you are going to get designs that will max this out, and the neighbors on both sides will be impacted more, I feel, than they are today with respect to the 2-story, the height of the wall, a 24-foot wall at 5 feet from the property line. And you're not going to be able to have that dialogue probably with the neighbors about who gets more sunlight and privacy than the other. So I do think that there's more work to be done, and several of the architects in the community have spent quite a bit of time being available to discuss it with the planning staff, and I'm willing to keep working. I think that there's definitely potential to bring the house size down and really improve, people's concerns or address people's concerns about bulk and privacy, but I think that there's other ways to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Una. Next is Peter Hartzell.
Thank you very much. I'd just quickly reiterate a couple things and then make one main point. So I've lived in San Carlos for 14 years. I live up on Ridge Road. I've been at least, I think, 4 of these meetings now. I've probably put 10 hours or more into sitting in these meetings. And I have to support Lucia's comments that I feel that I've seen letters coming to you and been in these meetings and heard a lot that I don't feel is being represented tonight. And that's frustrating, and I'm feeling a little worn out by this time. I'm sure you all may be as well. So I'd like you to take note of that, and I encourage you, especially the 3 of you who are new to the committee, to please go back and look at some of the comments that have come through that aren't represented by what we heard tonight. I think a form-based approach, I'm not an architect, but I think it certainly seems to address the massing on the street, and I appreciate that. Walking around San Carlos, I think with the glasses that Stefan has helped us put on, makes me think that this will be an improvement in that regard. But I think we made a mistake in 2011 in San Carlos by allowing this, these gross homes and the 90% floor area coverage. And I think, as John Dugan said before he left, and others have said, I think it's going to be in the nature, especially for a developer, an architect working with someone who's just bought a property, to maximize these rules that we're putting out there, which means we're going to end up with, in many cases, the 70-78% floor area ratio. That will be that will be the default, and it will take a lot to move back from that, which I think is out of line with our neighbors, and I think is out of line with the character that I feel is the character of San Carlos. So I'd strongly encourage you to keep in mind, I would say it's probably some combination of the form and floor area ratio, but don't throw that out. I think we're going to end up with continuing to be disappointed and feel like we didn't make the reform we wanted to at this point after the 2011 previous reform. I think the final point is there's an inherent asymmetric relationship when you're in front of the RDRC. You have a developer, you've got a homeowner who's got a lot on the line, is working with an architect, and they're the ones who really are going to push for what they want. The neighbors on either side, the neighbors in general, don't have the same interest, the background, the money at stake at that point. And I think to make it flexible is good, but in this case, flexible means it will default in the direction of the developers, which I think is what we've seen over the last 10 years in San Carlos. And so I would say we need to be really careful. I like the idea of improving the RDRC, although it wasn't clear tonight what exactly that means. And the word neighbor never came up in any of these bullet points. And yet it's the neighbors, I think, who've been here speaking for the last year in this process, asking for more respect for their side of this story. And so if we don't have a process that's got the right tools and that really respects the neighbor in a dignified way, I think we've missed a great opportunity, and I hope we don't do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is John Stewart.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I've been an architect in San Carlos for 37 years. I lived here for 14 years. I was on the committee in 2011 that changed these ordinances, and I was approached to be on the shack, but I didn't get picked. I've been at all these meetings, and I haven't heard one person come up and say, I really like the direction that we're going. Every time it's, 20, 30 people saying we're making a big mistake. The whole form-based code, there's 20 different communities in San Mateo County. Not one of them has anything like this. They're out in Livermore and Petaluma. I think, the consultant came in with that idea and they just ran with it. I think it's a big problem. Una did a really good job of communicating the problems with the side setbacks, that you can have so much area right up against the 5-foot setback. It's much worse than what we already have. Poor Natalie sees her picture of her beautiful house every day that they say it's terrible, and then he does a sketch that just has a flat box. So I like her design much better than what the new proposal is. I think we need a floor area ratio. The only two places that don't have it are Redwood City and San Carlos. And I was at a meeting last night, and Redwood City's going to implement it. So I think guidelines would be a really good idea. Like in Hillsborough, they have guidelines for how to fit in a house in a neighborhood. I think that would be very helpful. It'd be something that RDRC can use to judge whether a home fits in with the neighborhood. Clients want a 2-car garage. I think 12 feet back is way too far. They make beautiful garage doors now. You can offset the doors. You can put a trellis over it. There's so many different ways of making a garage look good. The exterior wall height could prevent you from having gable situations. I don't know if you know the difference between a gable and a hip, but a hip, the roof is all going away from you, where a gable shows a triangle. So that's a problem. The 3-foot basement, I think, is a big problem too, because like somebody was saying, putting space in a basement is a good idea because it takes some of the mass and puts it in a place where you don't see it. This whole idea of waivers, to get a a variance, you have to make findings, and you'd almost have to make findings for waivers. And I think leaving that to the staff would be the real sticky situation. Let's see. I said from the beginning that you've only studied rectangular flat lots. And if you look at that drawing that was up there, at least half of San Carlos is not White Oaks or Britton Acres. I think the timing, you know, I've seen proposals that you're going to vote on this the next time it comes before you. I think that's way too aggressive. We got to take our time and do it right. So thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, John. Next is Paul Young.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Paul Young, and I'm a recent transplant, bought in November. I have a kind of similar situation to one of the gentlemen before me. I have an interesting topography and a home that's not compliant to kind of the proposed envelope. It's a U shape, so you try to find out where the envelope is in the U. I'm looking to do an expansion, but I found kind of navigating the changing rules and proposals very, very challenging. And I'm kind of in an interesting situation where my neighbor, he did a large renovation and sort of McMansioned his home, but he's well downhill, so it doesn't affect me too much. But I don't think it would impose too much on him, some of the things that I've been thinking of, and he actually proposed some of the changes that would be non-compliant, but make a lot of sense given my topography and other things. So first, I'd urge to make the RDRC have a lot of leeway and the ability to kind of negotiate to amicable parties. And then also, I wanted to mention that the 3-foot basement is very restrictive. So I'm on Hull and Chestnut, and I have the two-car garage in the front. And essentially, if you treat the garage as my first floor, and that's my envelope, and my house is kind of spilling out with wings everywhere in this U shape, it doesn't really give me a lot of leeway on what we can and can't do. It just seems that the forms-based approach is very prescriptive in dealing with a general problem. And then this is kind of a separate comment, but it seems like a lot of effort and emphasis has been put on to trying to preserve San Carlos as it is. And just a general comment that I would also urge the city to kind of look at zoning and other ways to just increase housing supply in general, because while it is important to preserve the well-being and livelihood of people who are currently here, there's a lot of people who are excluded from the community because they just can't simply afford to live here. And I think we're kind of trying to protect people's homes as they are now, but we're also investing all that energy in a way that excludes people from building higher density homes and other things in the area. So, thank you.
Thank you. This may be the last speaker if the others two